everybody, Renee here from O'Reilly Auto Parts to show you how to change the front brake pads and rotors on a 2014 Nissan Altima. Procedures will be similar for most Altima models from 2013 to 2018, but be sure to know the specifics for your vehicle before getting started. Once you've got your supplies together, here's what you'll do. Park on a level surface. Use a breaker bar and a 21mm socket or lug wrench to loosen the lug nuts on your front wheels. Chock the rear wheels. Lift and support the front end of the car. Remove the lug nuts and the front wheels. Use a ratchet and 14mm socket to loosen the two caliper mounting bolts and remove them. Slide the caliper out of the bracket. And use the caliper hanger to suspend it in the wheel well, making sure there's no pressure on the brake hose. Use your ratchet and 22mm socket to loosen the caliper bracket bolts. Remove the bolts and the caliper bracket. You can leave the old pads in the bracket for now. Remove the old rotor from the hub. If it's seized to the hub, use a hammer to knock it loose. Keep in mind this will damage the rotor surface and it likely won't be able to be resurfaced, so a replacement rotor will be needed. Once you remove the old rotor, use a wire brush to remove any rust from the hub, and a wheel stud brush to scrub any rust off the threaded studs. Wipe any dust from the hub and bolts. Adding silicone brake grease to the hub before installing your new rotor will make it easier to remove it during your next brake service. Now remove the old pads and hardware from your caliper bracket and give the bracket a visual inspection. If the bracket is extremely rusty where the pads or hardware will sit, it needs to be replaced. Remove the slide pins, noting that the slide pin from the bottom of the bracket has a rubber boot at its tip, and the top pin does not. If the pins are corroded or pitted, they should be replaced. Spray the bracket down with brake cleaner, but don't use a wire brush to clean it, as this can lead to further corrosion. While the bracket is drying, use brake cleaner and a shop towel or rag to wipe any oils from the friction surface of your new rotor if needed. Brake cleaner will strip paint, so be careful where you spray it. Once you've cleaned the rotor, mount it on the hub, and use a lug nut to hold it in place while you continue to work. Now apply some of your 100% silicone grease to the caliper bracket where the new brake hardware will sit. Install your new hardware at the top and bottom of the bracket, making sure it's completely secure. Now wipe down the slide pins and apply fresh silicone grease. Reinstall the pins, remembering that the pin with the rubber boot goes at the bottom end of the bracket. And make sure both pins glide smoothly. Now you can install your new brake pads in the bracket. You'll notice the pads have metal clips at one end of them. These clips go at the top end of the bracket. Once you've installed the slide pins, brake hardware, and pads, it's time to reinstall the bracket. Lift it into place with the pads on either side of the rotor, and thread the top 22mm bolt by hand. Once the top bolt is in place, thread the bottom bolt as well. Use your ratchet and 22mm socket to tighten the bolts. Then use your torque wrench to tighten those bolts to 91 foot-pounds. Now clean the exposed portion of your caliper piston with brake cleaner on a towel or rag. If the rubber boot is cracked or if there's brake fluid leaking, the caliper needs to be replaced. Compress the brake caliper with the brake caliper compressor tool. Use an old brake pad to protect the piston. When you're done, the piston should be flush with the housing. Now move the caliper into place over the pads, making sure the brake hose isn't twisted. Thread the two mounting bolts by hand, starting with the top bolt. Use your ratchet and 14mm socket to tighten them. Once they're snug, torque these bolts to 20 foot-pounds. If you used a lug nut to keep the rotor in place, you can remove it now, as well as your caliper hanger. Reinstall the wheel, and tighten the lug nuts until the wheel is secure against the rotor. It's always a good idea to change brake pads and rotors in pairs, so repeat these steps on the other side. Lower the front end, and remove the wheel chocks. Use your 21mm socket and torque wrench to tighten the nuts in a star pattern to 83 foot-pounds. Once the job is complete, before you drive anywhere, Be sure to pump your brake pedal several times until you feel the pressure return. Some brake fluid was pushed out when you compressed your caliper pistons, so check your master cylinder and add fluid as needed. If your brake pedal feels spongy, it's likely that you have air in one or both of your front brake lines. Here's a link to a video on how to bleed those lines to remove the air if needed. To help break in the new components, it's a good idea to test drive your vehicle, slowing it 30 times from 30 miles per hour at moderate brake pressure, allowing the brakes to cool for about 30 seconds in between each slowdown. Try to avoid aggressive stops during this break-in process. Your brakes will probably smell after you've done this, and that's okay. If the odor persists past 500 miles or so, or if you have excessive dust on a wheel, you may have a stuck caliper. And that's it. You'll find everything you need for this and other jobs at your local O'Reilly Auto Parts store or O'ReillyAuto.com. If you're not completely comfortable doing this yourself, we'd be happy to recommend a professional technician in your area. And be sure to subscribe so you'll see all our new video content. We'll see you again soon.